You are listening to Sober Motivation Radio. All right, guys, welcome to the fourth episode for Sober Motivation, and I'm excited to be here. I got a great topic. Somebody asked a fantastic question that I think definitely deserves discussion. This person, I'm going to give them a shout out like I told them I was going to. This person's name was Shelly. Shout out to you. Thank you for the suggestion. So she brought up the idea of what to do to celebrate. She said, I can say no in the dark times, but it's when you're feeling good and think one won't hurt. How do you deal with that? And I have to actually think back to myself on that. I like to do a little bit of a personal reflection on that idea, and I know that feeling where, you know, you're in that great feeling of everything's fantastic, and you know what would make this feel even better is a drink or whatever it is that you're stuck dealing with addiction. And also I'm going to include some books too that I brought up that I think are worth discussion in this podcast. The three books that I have for review that I feel are relatable to dealing with success in sobriety. The first book is called Rewire, and this book is about changing your brain to break bad habits, overcome addiction, and conquer self-destructive behavior. This is by Richard O'Connor. The second book that I am bringing into this discussion is called True North, Discover Your Authentic Leadership. And then the last book, which I think will definitely give you guys that strong leaving point, the Motivation Manifesto by Brendan Burchard. So you'll definitely want to stick around throughout the podcast so you guys can consume the information, so you guys can go on. And also check out the I'll link the books to Amazon in the description for each book if you guys want to pick up the book. And I'll also have the Blinkist my Blinkist affiliation link in the description as well. You guys don't have to sign up for it, but if you subscribe to it, if you just get an email subscription done for me, it really helps the conversion for me, and it helps out building out this podcast. So if you guys are looking to drop some support, please subscribe or check it out. Like I said, Blinkist is fantastic. It's great. It's education on the move, and for people like me, or maybe even yourself, depending on what you're working on, it's a fantastic tool to just eat and consume knowledge like we love to. So anyways, going back on to the topic of this episode, dealing with our success in sobriety. And like I was saying before, when you're consuming or if you're stuck in addiction and you're hitting that feeling of success, and it always feels great because, you know, your brain releases dopamine, and then you take that drink and you think you're going to get some more good feelings out of it. But I was kind of thinking about it too as I was making this, and to me it's like the whiteboard of success when you're drinking. So think about having a giant whiteboard on your wherever, and you put down success all over the board, and all it just takes just from drinking and doing what you know isn't going to help you the next day, because, you know, hangovers suck, and or whatever. I mean, if you're doing it long term, it's harder to put that success back on the board, but it just wipes it quickly. And I found that too for myself with my struggling addictions, that if say something great happened, I was like, man, this was fantastic. I got a raise in my job, or I completed this goal that I had. And I would think to myself, man, I'm just going to drink, and that's going to just make it even better. And then in reality, it just slows you right down, like for me, I could tell my my ambition just, it went down the drain. Anything that I was thinking that I was going to work on never got worked on. For instance, I remember forever I was trying to do a YouTube channel or even this podcast. I mean, like, I'd be like, you know what'll help me smooth out like what I want to go do is drinking. Drinking will help me just get over whatever I'm feeling like not doing. And every single time that I thought I was going to get into the groove of working on what I told myself I was going to work on, I'd just be sitting there, I'd have YouTube out or something, and I'd just be stuck just listening to music and completely far away from really working on what I was trying to work on in the first place. So I think another idea that is worth thinking about when you're getting to that point where you're thinking, oh man, I'm going to use right now and get that great feeling out of what I'm feeling even more, is to realize that one bit of success that you're facing is not going to stick with you forever. So even if, say, you got a job promotion or you did whatever, I mean, if you made a bunch of money, I mean, you can't just be done with that. And I think that's where it's important to actually have what's called the growth mindset idea. So I think realizing that, and this is where this next book actually is pretty useful. Rewire, changing your brain to break bad habits and overcome addiction, to conquer your self-destructive behavior. But just realize that when you're going to use, for one, you know it's going to probably spin out of control. And then whatever you're trying to accomplish is in the future is just going to get delayed. So I'm going to go into this right now with the first book. So Rewire, change your brain to break bad habits, overcome addiction, conquer self-destructive behavior. And so the first point that I have outlined from this book, it says we have two selves that dictate our actions, and we can learn to control them. And the two selves that are listed are either doing what's right and what's wrong, or actually what's conscious and what's subconscious. So your subconscious mind is just always drawn to dopamine, better dopamine. So for instance, like I was saying before, when you're about to drink, your subconscious mind is drifting towards that. And so that's where it's important to take your brain and just be ready in watching that. When, say, for instance, you're about to go drink, your conscious has to take over your subconscious and realize, hey, this is what I need to avoid. And I think that's pretty important. For me lately, I think because, like I said, I've been working on this podcast, I've been working on the website, getting the Facebook and everything else going, that like even these small victories, even just getting an episode out, which to me would be a success back when I was drinking. I just realized that like it's only one part of it. It's only one part of my success of what I'm doing. And I think that helps me with realizing that the time for drinking is not there. Like, I just seriously don't have the time. Like, if I thought that drinking was in my time of something that I could do, maybe it would cross my mind. But I guess that's where just having continuous goals just set up in front of you are it's really important to do that. And then the second point, it says certain habits can lead you into self-destructive behavior. And I think that's a good point. And like this person was saying, when you're celebrating and you're excited about your success, is your road to going back down the self-destructive behavior. And maybe I would suggest, if celebrating after success is causing you to go down the path of self-destruction, that maybe just delaying the celebration and just saying, you know what, I don't need to party for this. It's not a big enough a deal where I can take the time out of everything else to sit here and celebrate over it. And I think that's a useful idea that you can look over. The next point it brings up, it says repressed emotions cause us to become self-destructive. And I think that's true. I know for myself it's definitely true. I've definitely, when I was in my substance abuse treatment program, I had to go into my past basically and pick out things that were causing me to be self-destructive. So when I was younger, actually when I was in third grade, and I can still remember this clear as day, and I guess I can feel a little bit better about this, but for instance, this repressed emotion was of me sitting in third grade, and I came from a house that wasn't perfectly together, as some would say. Like, there was no heating in the house. And there's whatever, I don't even think my home life is really accountable for how I was performing as a student in the third grade. I think at this point I'd like to take it for myself and just say, you know what, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to as a third grader. But I remember telling the third grade teacher, because she had asked everyone what their dream job was at some point, and I said I wanted to go on to direct movies, because I don't know, I always had these big ideas, and I still think it's important to just keep up with your big ideas, even if you never come close. I mean, if you're just continuously working on it, it's all for the better, in my opinion. But in this particular case, I brought up that, and I remember her laughing and the whole class laughing, and I still remember it. Like, it's crazy. Like, as I'm sitting in here, I'm getting flashbacks thinking about how I was getting laughed at in third grade by my teacher, all my classmates, and it like came up in my substance abuse treatment program and talking about it. And I guess I can identify the anger in it too, where maybe, someday if I'm just sitting around thinking about it without other things to do, it could be a trigger to go drink. But at this point, like I said, I'm excited. Like, I'm so excited just to be here talking to you guys. And from what I'm gathering from the videos I'm putting out so far, people are listening. So that's pretty cool. And then the next point, it says self-destructive behavior can also result from a need for attention, general unhappiness, or a loss of motivation to fix problems. And I can agree with that. Need for attention. I think for myself, I still like the idea of attention. I mean, whoever says they don't like attention, to a certain degree, positive attention, I think they're lying about it. And then general unhappiness, yeah, I can see that, or things, if everything around you is going poorly, or a loss of motivation to fix problems. Yeah, I can see how those can all contribute to working into drinking. And I think maybe you have to figure out what works against causing you to go into a self-destructive path for that. So for me, need for attention. I think what's helping me right now with that is, like I said, doing this podcast, because I know it's more than for attention. It's not just for myself to get attention. Like, I want to know that this is helping people. If it is, I'm going to be thrilled, because it's what I've set out for this brand to work on, because I feel like addiction is just so disgusting. Like, it's ugly. Like, it's killed so many people through drug overdose, all the alcohol related incidents where it's killed people through drunk driving, causing people to just become alcoholics, where they're just so dependent and sucked into that chemical where they just can't get away from it. And then general unhappiness. Yeah, I can see that too. But like I said, I think to get some ideas to work on your general unhappiness, I mean, you kind of got to look at it from your outside perspective. But I think something that I can add to that point, to the general unhappiness that helped me, I used to be huge into watching Survivor Man and Man vs. Wild with Bear Grylls. And I always loved Survivor Man because he's such a loner and he just does the show so entirely well. But Bear Grylls, I know he gets some flack because a lot of the show might be scripted and set up in a certain way, which is whatever. I think like the whole point of his show is not to do what Survivor Man is doing and to give you like, okay, if you're in this situation, here's what you do. But there was one particular point in that show that I was watching it, and he was walking in the jungle, and he was having a hard time with it, and he came across this tiny pink little flower, and he's just said, "Look at that beautiful pink flower," while he's just in the freaking thick of it, and he says, it's all about the little victories, and I still think of that today. I think the little victories are important to think about because, I mean, sometimes that's all you might have to help you, whatever it is, And I think he even said it was like false hope, but even false hope is better than no hope, which is kind of depressing, I guess. But I think it's a good way to kind of look at things in your own life. If you're waking up today, you're breathing. That's a small victory because, people aren't doing that. You're not, hopefully you're not struggling with too many health issues. But if you are, there's still some small victories that you can look at to apply to yourself. If it's between just waking up and breathing to being able to see your loved ones again, I think that's a small victory. And then, a loss of motivation to fix problems. Yeah, and I can see that too. Like for myself, I felt powerless to a lot of problems I had. But the cool thing with drinking is that when you're not drinking, you're actively fixing that problem. And that's another small victory that, in my opinion, you can look at because it's not deteriorating your overall health. You're minimizing the things that you have to work through, for one. I mean, just not waking up with a hangover, like I've said previously. And just knowing that you're approaching your day with yourself, not a hangover, not being extra tired because you drank or did something too much of the night before, I think it's a small victory, but it's an impressive victory still because it's something that you don't have to deal with. So you can work on whatever it is that might seem like an unfixable problem. And then the next point, it says addictions and undertow are two forms of self-destructive behavior. And yes, addiction can definitely be a self-destructive behavior with how it kind of just sucks you into just not being able to get away from it. And I think the way to kind of deal with that too is just to try to maintain balance in whatever you're doing, and not feeling like you're getting overwhelmed with things, and just kind of try to figure out how you can keep perspective or deal with it. For addiction, I mean, obviously, if you need help, obviously, get the help that you need first. And I think that helps a lot. For instance, with my drinking issue, like I had to go to a substance treatment program and just deal with it. And I think the biggest thing that helped me in that program was the way they had it structured. Was basically I was never doing one thing too much. Like everything was broken up into like a pretty solid schedule. So, for instance, I had to be up at a certain time. Breakfast was a must. Let's see, I had to go to classes, and they weren't difficult classes. They were just basically kind of discussing different topics at the different points about, say, how I was feeling, or one class in particular was pretty interesting. Somebody, the person who was leading the class, was talking about listing the 3 most important things to you, and he was talking about how if you make a deal with, say, somebody who says they're a king to you, and they control everything, and they decide whether or not you can keep whatever it is that you have is up to them, but you have to figure out if they're worth being a partner to you. And it was pretty trippy. And then it breaks it up. So like I wouldn't spend all day thinking about that or being stuck in that one class. It would be for, say, an hour. And then the next hour would be another class of, say, hey, I was in an AA class, or meditation, or an art class. And it was cool. It's just really broken up. And I think that helps with addiction, because you figure out how important balance is. And even going to the gym, that was something that we had to do. We had to go work out. And for me personally, I used to be crazy into bodybuilding. And that was kind of my addiction too at one point. Before I started drinking, I was just hooked on just going constantly to the gym, to where I'd spend easily 3 hours a day there. And even if it wasn't doing me any real good, it didn't matter. And it kind of screwed things up, because the rest of my life was so out of balance. And it eventually led to self-destructiveness. And yeah. And then the undertow, obviously, if you're getting overwhelmed, I think just being able to breathe and center yourself, and think about what kind of issues you're dealing with, and the perspective of what kind of issues you're dealing with is important. For me personally, so for instance, getting this podcast in order is kind of an overwhelming thought. But about a year ago, when I was just stuck into my terrible addiction of just drinking, I think back now, and I'm thinking about, man, like, my stress is trying to get this podcast up and getting it going. And maybe for yourself, if you're getting overwhelmed by things, I mean, I don't like to use comparisons to help you feel better, but I mean, I know Alcoholics Anonymous and people like to share, or people who share their issues, it's so other people can compare what they're dealing with also, to just not feel left out of the loop, where they don't just feel like they're all alone dealing with their problems, I think is important. And I think another thing that is useful too, if you're feeling overwhelmed, is actually just talking to somebody about what is overwhelming you. And something big that I got out of, even though I'm not actively involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, but something that I got out of one of the meetings I was at, it was about sharing what's going on with you to somebody else. And even if they can't help you, like, actively, like, even if they can't say, flick their finger and get rid of the issue immediately, I think with the problems going on and just spinning around in your head, and you're on your own with that, I think just giving somebody else the idea, or at least a little bit of an understanding of what you're personally dealing with, is it's great, honestly. And so I was sitting in a meeting, and I was getting a bunch of like phone calls and random texts, and that was when this person shared what was going on. He was just like, look, if you're dealing with issues, even if somebody can't actively go out and just make those issues disappear for you, just letting them know, so you're just not by yourself completely in the issue, and just having some form of communication open kind of puts you back into a flow of things a little bit, so you're not by yourself and just being totally imbalanced on your own, and having your own problems to deal with that nobody knows about even. And I think that was an important thing that I got out of it. And then so it goes into the next point in this book. It says we can break bad habits by practicing mindfulness and self-control. And obviously, I think that's important. Like I said, when you're having your success and you're finding that, oh, okay, like now I feel really good. That's when your mindfulness needs to just kick in, honestly, and just realize, hey, that is an issue. And if you can just catch that and realize that, I think it's a pretty big help. And I can kind of identify that for myself. For instance, getting this podcast up and going and seeing people who are viewing it, I think for me is exciting. You know, when I'm looking at the analytics and the reports of everything, I'm excited. I'm just thrilled. I'm like, man, people are investing their time and listening to what I'm talking about. And I could definitely see that as a way for me previously, like a few months ago. If I had saw that when I was drinking, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm having success. Time to go drink and make it feel better. And the biggest key point in that is that as soon as I'd start doing that, it's just going to just delay, sidetrack, just smash all of the progress that's being made. So I can see how catching that is important and having that self-control and realizing when you're having this success. It's more important then when you're having success to have self-control than it is entirely, in my opinion, because that's where getting from that one success and getting over to the next success, that gap is so important to identify for yourself. So that was a pretty good read. Again, check it out. I'm gonna leave, like I said, the link to this book through Amazon. It's Rewire with Richard O'Connor. So good read. The next book I'm going to go into is called True North, and it says Discover Your Authentic Leadership by Bill George. And okay, so I think this is important too for success and trying to avoid the pitfalls. So the first step, it says, take your inspiration and passion for leadership from your life story. And it's so crazy, like, I hate saying the word like, but it's so crazy for me to think about my inspiration and passion for leadership is coming from my life story. And that is really, really it for this podcast, which is cool because I get to sit here and just talk and just fire off all the things that are in my head. So I think it's important for anybody listening to do the same and look at what your life story is, and looking at your past and what you've dealt with, I think helps push you to better lead, obviously, which being a better leader allows you to go forward towards those goals that you want to go achieve. So take note of that. And then the next point says self-centeredness can make you lose sight of your inner compass. And I agree, but I think there's a balance to it where it says self-centeredness can make you lose sight of your inner compass. I've said previously, I think being selfish is important for sobriety, but I think doing it too much to where it leads to complete imbalance is where your inner compass will probably fly off and not work like it's supposed to. And then the next point, it says, authentic leadership is about empowering others on their journey. So I can agree with that. So for instance, right, there's a difference between authority and leadership. This is something that I've come to terms with in my career from the Navy, in that there's authority and there's leadership. And being an authentic leader, when you're coming into issues with yourself and you deal with them, and then in the future when you're kind of dealing with it again, or if you see other people dealing with it again, where they're trying to go forward in what they're trying to do, and identifying what was wrong in your past and using that sort of experience and giving it to the people who are trying to follow the same path, I think helps you develop becoming a more authentic leader, and it would empower other people. The next point, it says self-awareness will keep you moving in the right direction. And like I said, I was pretty sure this would connect well to the idea where self-awareness will keep you moving in the right direction. So again, and that's where I've found it and I've dealt with it myself, and I can identify it now even better, but realizing when you're about to go back down the same rabbit hole with abusing substances and going into a self-destructive path is going to send you downwards, not forward or wherever you're trying to go. The next point, it says practice your values and principles. Yeah, I think that's important to do, your values. For me, I have honor, courage, and commitment. I think those are actually three great things. I think honor and being true or being honest about whatever's going on is important. Being courageous, obviously, when you're dealing with any sort of adversity is important, and then committing to whatever you're going to do is important. And then for principles, again, that's important also. It depends, I guess, what your principles are. I think, for instance, if you're trying to stay sober and not drinking, practicing that on a constant basis will help you. If you're following, say, a 12-step program and you want to practice those principles, I think that'll help you also with avoiding the same pitfall of going back into the rabbit hole of abusing substances. And then the next point, it says, find the right motivation to get the most out of your capabilities. And I think that's important too. So for this podcast, for instance, where I know I'm getting to help people, I feel like it's allowing me to really get the most out of what I have educated myself on in various different things to get a lot out of it. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I like pushing this so much, because, like I said, I've spent a lot of time educating myself and not exactly executing. So doing this, helping other people, is allowing me to figure out how capable am I of using my education. So I think that's extremely important. The next point, it says, build your support team by investing in lasting relationships. And I think that's another good point, especially when you're dealing with sobriety, and building a good support team is important. For me personally, I think my wife has been my biggest support team, but also some of the people that I've started to reach out with working on getting this podcast, for instance, Ryan Helms, Daxi Perez. I can see a good relationship there already, which I'm looking forward to. The other thing too, some of the peers that I've come to, I still communicate with them today, actually, like on a constant basis, about sobriety, or if I'm having any personal issues, where I can reach out to them and talk to them about what I'm doing. And I think if you're looking at trying to avoid the same pitfalls of, hey, I'm starting to drink, maybe looking at what you're around or who you're around is important. And say if you're dealing with success and you're by yourself and you're thinking, okay, time to go drink because I'm happy. But if you're by yourself and you're going to go drink, maybe getting out of the situation of being by yourself would be useful, whether it's going, say, to going on a walk or going to the gym to work out and feel that success even more and feel the dopamine even better with a healthier outlet, or maybe going to the store. I think Barnes and Nobles is a great place to go. I love that place. I could sit in that place forever and just read constantly, and just being around people who are kind of doing the same thing, I think helps. But I think also if you're finding that after your success, you're around other people who are doing the same thing of being self-destructive, maybe you want to look at not celebrating with them afterwards, or not letting them be near you when you're having your successful moments, and realizing that maybe the people around you are influencing you to go back into a negative path. And so, I mean, me personally, I'm sort of a loner, and I hate to say that, but it is what it is. But I think for me, the way the support team has changed is that I've realized that I actually have to invest into people. So, for instance, I've had to invest. I'm taking a radio college class right now, and I've had to invest my time into that class to stick around and continue to do it. So, another thing too is reaching out to people who are good to have in your life and investing in them. So, for instance, if you're taking a class and you're investing into them, having them in your circle is, I feel, important when you're dealing with sobriety. So if your circle before was, say, the same people who were doing the same thing of drinking, changing that circle, whether it be to just be you or to be other people who are trying to maintain sobriety, is, I think, worth looking at. And the next point, it says, integrate all aspects of your life so you always stay true to yourself. And I agree. I think that's a pretty solid last point to sum up with that. Integrating all aspects of yourself so that you always stay true to yourself. So, for instance, me building this podcast off the idea of being sober and staying motivated to it, that really is the reason why I'm making this podcast, was because I know where I'm at, and I know that, like I said before, in October, my probationary period for abstinence comes to a close. And so I had to develop this podcast because that is it. That's the name of the podcast. That's the name of the brand. That's the name of the life that I have to keep going. And it's sober motivation. I need it constantly. And if AA isn't my answer at that point, then it needs to be something else. So that's where I'm developing what I think is useful for me and what I think will be useful for other people. And then we'll go into the last book, which I think is the best book that I have for this podcast. This one is called The Motivation Manifesto by Brendan Burchard. So this book talks about learning how to become more motivated and get more out of your life. And I think that is important. The more motivated you are, the more you're willing to go do stuff, you're going to get more out of your life. And honestly, I can identify that for myself today. For instance, I had a phone call that I had to get from somebody today because I wanted to talk to him about trying to develop a YouTube video content solution for this. And I work graveyard shifts, so it's crazy, but I knew I had to be up to get that phone call. And it helped me get more out of life because I got the course that I needed to help me work on building that. And additionally, to that point, so for instance, tomorrow I have another meeting. I have to go meet with my professor for my radio class, and I could easily just lay in bed, just blow it off and ignore it and turn off my phone and turn off all of it, but it's just going to shoot myself in the foot. As much as I love sleeping, I'm telling you, when it comes to sleeping, I love it, but I know that me sleeping in is just going to create closed doors. It's going to not create closed doors. It's going to close doors. It's going to close doors in my life. So it's important to stick with the motivation, whatever it is, and just get out there and do it. And I think what else helps with that, if you're trying to deal with your motivation, is say if there's something that you're trying to do, and I brought this out as a discussion point. I've been hooking up with the Jedi community on Facebook. They're cool, but I brought up this idea, and I was talking about how do you deal with just educating yourself all the time and executing? Like, how do you get through the bridge past the bridge of what's between education and execution? And somebody made a great point about not putting whatever that is on the other side on a pedestal. So if you kind of get the idea of leveling it, not making whatever you're trying to do into a mountain, and just keep it at a level pace to where it's not as difficult in your mind, and you're just going to go do it without a whole bunch of thought behind it, it becomes way easier. And I think that snowballs into other areas of your life, where when you're accomplishing one goal, then all of a sudden you're accomplishing a bunch of different goals. So the next point, it says a yearning for freedom and the burden of fear are humankind's most fundamental driving forces. And I agree with that. A yearning for freedom. And I have to say, my yearning from freedom, I was yearning for freedom against addiction. That was my biggest thing that I had to deal with, where everything, for some reason, I just felt as though everything was the same. I felt like my world around me, I just felt trapped. I felt like not only did nothing matter, but I felt like I was caged. And I guess that's why I want to make this for you guys, and not just try to sell you guys stuff. I want to give you guys value to help you, like help your lives for real. And so breaking addiction for me from alcohol and certain things where I just think it's just horrible, was something that's important for me. And I think doing this podcast helps me with the freedom of knowing, like, hey, I'm not trapped to just be doing nothing, to just drinking. Like, I've gotten past that, and I'm in your ears talking to you through this microphone. So I'm breaking it. I'm breaking the addiction trap, and the burden of fear, again, is another driving force. And I think it is important to have some fears, but I think you should keep it also in perspective. So for me, for instance, the fear of drinking again, I think is my positive driving force. And maybe that's what some of you guys might need, is the fear of drinking behind you to help drive you to do the other things. And I think that's helping me more than doing anything else. So for instance, before, when I was trying to launch a podcast and launch a YouTube, I felt like I was in a chase for, say, more money, for instance. But now, since my driving force behind me it's not the idea that I need more money. It's the idea that I cannot drink. I can't do it. Like, I have to put the black eye on this idea of drinking and just keep going with it. And so that's given me a lot of motivation. It almost feels like somebody slapped a jetpack on my back, which I guess maybe I did it for myself, and it's just allowed me to just fly. And I think that's important, and to really figure out what it is you are afraid of, and use that maybe as your motivation. And so, for instance, if it's for me, drinking again, because my brain's sharp now. I'm loving it. Like, it's incredible. So I think losing the sharpness of my brain at this point, and the ability to stay focused, losing that at this point is something that I just can't have. And so I'm fighting with everything I can against it. And then the next point, it says, motivation needs fuel to burn hot. It is in your power to keep that fire burning. And agreed. So I would definitely agree with that point. What has helped me with fueling this fire of motivation personally and for the brand, I think, is just reaching out to the people who are giving the feedback on the idea. I think that's given me a lot of motivation. So, for instance, the person who said that success is a issue that they were dealing with was literally jet fuel to this podcast. I felt it. I was like, I'm so excited to go out and make this podcast. It was to the point where I had to get this podcast done because of the fuel that they put into this vehicle of myself, I guess, to go get it going. And I guess looking at other people's mindsets or what they're struggling with is kind of fuel for me as well. And the future too provides some motivation. I feel as though the future of this brand is bright. Honestly, it's bright. Like, it's it's cool. It is cool. But even if that wasn't there, and it was just if it was just for the people just to take and enjoy, that alone is a lot of motivation for me to, like I said, be fighting this addiction for myself and fighting it for other people. Because honestly, when I think about it, I think of my struggle and what it did to me and what it did to people I know and love, and I just want to fight it. Like, I want to put a black eye on this addiction, and I want to make it feel horrible. Like, the idea of drinking, like, I want to be standing over my addiction and just pound away at it. If I was in a cage with my addiction and that was a person, that's my feeling for this podcast. So the next point, it says, stop looking over your shoulder at what was, concentrate on what is now, and practice happiness. And like I said, this was the book that you guys needed to stick around to listen to. And I strongly agree with what it says. Stop looking over your shoulder at what was, and concentrating on what is now. And I think for me, when I came up with the idea of what I was doing with this podcast, I was looking at my past, and I was thinking about all of my relationships, friendships, and just people I knew in general, and how it was just destroyed from my drinking. And then I came into another epiphany of realizing how important self-love was. And that was something that I realized that I could do now. So whatever happened in those relationships in my past went away, because I realized that I can't do anything about it. It's not going to matter. I mean, I can reach out to these people and I can talk to them, or try to talk to them. I'm sure a lot of them won't talk to me, and it is what it is. But that doesn't matter. So I have to concentrate on what is now, and you yourself are now. So I think practicing happiness is another important thing. So I downloaded this app. It's on my iOS platform. Let's see. I'll put a link to that too. It's called Motivation, and I think I paid like $10 for the app, but it's great because it constantly just sends you notifications of motivation constantly. It just sends it into your feed. It's like, all right, here's a good thing today. Some of them I can't really relate to, but some of them I can. And I think that's important on a constant basis of practicing happiness and being happy about yourself, or at least loving yourself. Even if you aren't happy, you should at the very least love yourself. And so something I was doing was I texted myself some things, some positive things that I'd leave in my notification on my phone. So this was useful too. When I felt like I was just getting overwhelmed by everything, but I sent myself a text saying, "Oh, hey, love yourself." And so I did that first, and that actually helped me deal with a lot of things that I felt I was just too overwhelmed to just go deal with. And I just did my best with doing that. And I think that was a useful thing for me to do, to concentrate on what's now. So love yourself now, and then work on the things that you can and just do your best. And I think if you're doing your very best, and this was something one of my friends named Steve back in the day, he gave me a pretty solid bit of advice. He said, if you're doing your best, that's all that matters. And that really is all that matters. And I remind myself of that when, say, for instance, there's deadlines that I have to meet, and I'm going to work on meeting those deadlines. But again, I can only do my very best. I can't do anything more. As long as I know I'm doing my very best, that's what matters. So even if, say, there's a deadline, you don't make it, if you were doing your very best, what more can you ask for yourself or of yourself? So I think that's extremely important. And then the next topic, or the next point, it says, a little humble faith will slay your inner demons. A little reckless inspiration helps a lot too. And I agree. Humble faith is important. I think, for instance, for myself, doing this podcast and building the website and Facebook and reaching out to people, I have to keep the faith that this is a good idea. And it's humbling to me, actually, because I have to admit, hey, I have to be sober to do this. Like, my problem was that I was an extreme crazy drunk. And it's helped me slay these inner demons, in that it's helping me work on my self-image of getting onto YouTube and doing YouTube videos, or getting onto a podcast and having to listen to myself talk, because I know some people have that voice in their head where they hate their own voice. And I think just constantly telling myself, hey, what I'm doing is working. It lets me listen to my own voice and not get annoyed by it, for sure. So, I mean, and that's in real practical use. And reckless inspiration helps a lot too. A little reckless inspiration helps a lot too. I agree with that. I think there are some people that I look at for inspiration. I don't like to take too much of it, but I think looking at some people who are doing well in their lives, Tai Lopez, I guess. I know a lot of people don't like him, but I get his story, and I get what he's doing. He's an internet marketer, and he goes on Facebook and he advertises himself as the knowledge guy, and he's trying to sell these courses. And I'm not investing into his courses, but I get the inspiration from him because of what he's doing. I see how he's doing it, so that's cool. And some other people I guess I get some inspiration from is, for instance, Elon Musk, for instance. I get inspiration from that guy because when I hear about what he's doing for his projects that he's believing in, like, that guy is crazy. When he talks about how he was eating off of say, not more than $50 a month, and sleeping maybe 4 hours a day or whatever it took. And that's inspiring to me because of what I'm working on. It just it does require a lot of time and investment for me to keep working on this. But like I said, looking at people like Elon Musk and hearing him talk about how what he was working on and how he was doing it and just working ridiculously hard is inspiring to me. And another video that I was watching with him, it was how his heroes were against his idea of developing space travel commercially. And I think he said Neil Armstrong and another person where they were against his idea of commercial space travel. And he was upset about it. He was visibly upset to where there were tears coming out of his eyes. And he was just saying how it hurt, how his heroes basically were against what he thought they would be ultimately proud of. And I thought that was an inspiring point to internalize for myself, because for all I know, there's going to be people who are totally against what I'm doing, who don't believe that what I'm doing is the right answer to addiction. Maybe and I have heroes who have dealt with addiction and overcome it. And for all I know, they're going to say, hey, that's a horrible idea, or the way you're doing it is horrible, and I'm going to have to maybe face that. So I think seeing how he was dealing with his own hero's form of rejection to what he was doing was inspiring. So the last point, like I said, I hope you guys stuck around to listen to this podcast, because this is the most important point, I think, to dealing with success when you're trying to avoid drinking. And this final point says, fine isn't enough. Strive for the fantastic, living on your own terms, and inspiring others to follow. And I think that is an extremely important point to take in, because, for instance, when you're dealing with success, right, and your dopamines are on that high, and you drink, for me, from my perspective now, that is a level of fine, right? And so that is not enough. I think striving for fantastic, the amazing, the truly amazing things in your life is where you need to go. So you have to break that fine level and go to the fantastic option of, hey, not only was I successful today, but I was also able to get past that, move way beyond that, and keep working on what I'm working on. And I think that's where you'll find you'll trailblaze, and you'll be on the path of working on what you need to work on. And I think that is what is actually helping me with living on my own terms, and hopefully at some point inspiring others to follow, and that striving for fantastic. So for instance, putting out this podcast, putting out this YouTube, putting out the book. It's coming soon. It will be out. I know the outro tells you guys to pick it up, but it's on its way out. It will be out by the launch. And working on my website, and then there's still more things that I have to go do. So I'm developing at some point to get to some Toastmasters meetings, because I have to go do that for this, and that will inspire other people to follow. And I'm hoping also, after doing all this, I don't just want to do it for myself, but I also want to put this into such a way where it's able to be replicated by somebody else. So for instance, if you're struggling with addiction, I want to give you guys a tool. So I'm looking at putting together some courses we're having the courses available to you guys so that you guys can follow it, so that it just gives you something to do for one, but work on you the way you want to work on you, and get your brain away from the struggle of addiction and constantly doing things that are just toxic for you. And then as you're working on it, I'm sure you're going to be excited about whatever you're working on or talking about. Other people are going to catch that. They're going to see the light in what you're doing. So, for instance, something that I've been doing with my college class, where I signed up for the college radio class, and I knew, for instance, that I know the outcome for radio is not a bright outcome in general terms. On average, radio DJs are not known to make tons of money, but I'm doing that on my own terms. And so when I bring up the idea of, hey, look, I'm doing a college radio course, I'm on the radio, I'm able to go talk to people, I get to play music, and all this other stuff. Other people catch that light, and at first, some people might see it with negativity at first, because they'll look at you and say, oh, well, at least for myself, people are looking at me and saying, oh, well, he's doing something stupid. But eventually, when you're sticking to it and you're doing it because it's your terms, people are gonna turn, and over time, and even if they don't turn and other people see it, they're gonna be inspired by that light. And I think that's also important too. And I think it's definitely important for me, for instance, saying living on your own terms. For me, it actually is extremely important for me to be living on my own terms, especially when dealing with not drinking and staying sober. I have got to live on my own terms. I have to do this podcast. I have to get the content to you guys. I have to get you guys the information that I need to give you, because that's my fight against my addiction. And somebody who I was talking to who said that their loved one was dealing with substance abuse with alcohol. Apparently they would reach a certain point and then they'd go back to it. And that's where I told them basically, it's important for you to break up whatever causes you to go backwards to that. And that's where being on your own terms is so important. So for me, it's extremely important for me to get this book out. It's extremely important to get the podcast out. It's extremely important for me to be on the radio, doing what I'm doing, working on my YouTube stuff, and it's living on my own terms, because it's deadly serious to my sobriety. So the radio, the book, and all this, to me, it's almost funny to think about, but it's dead serious, because I have to work on this because I need these tools to work on, so I'm not dealing with drinking again, because it's such a killer to the brain and to life in general. So that is it. That is the 3 books that I wanted to give you guys, some key takeaways that you guys can use when dealing with success, when you're reaching a point of success in sobriety, so that you can use it to stay sober and stay motivated. Again, shout out to Blinkist. Again, if you guys haven't checked out Blinkist, I left the affiliate link in my description. So if you guys, even if you don't sign up, if you guys just subscribe, it gives me, it helps me out a lot, and I would definitely appreciate it. So check that out, and then check out the YouTube channel. I'm putting it together, and I'm posting it all up on there. These podcasts should be up on YouTube, iTunes pretty soon, Spotify, Google Play. I'll be posting it to Facebook also. So I'm trying to get this onto as many mediums as I can for traffic purposes. And then on top of all that, I'm also looking at a giveaway soon, and I'll be working on announcing that soon and when it is, and it's gonna be good. I'm actually excited about this. So another, like I said, thing of where I have to do it because it's on my terms, and I have to deal with it because I got to get away from drinking. So this giveaway is important, and it'll be cool to you guys. I think you guys will enjoy it, and so stick around, keep following. Please, if you guys are listening to it on iTunes or wherever, give it a thumbs up, or if it's a thumbs down to it, whatever, and then just leave me a review so I can figure out if whatever I'm doing is working out. So thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sober Motivation Radio. If you're not subscribed already, please be sure to do that right now. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could do me a quick favor and rate and review the podcast. This lets the platform know that I'm doing something right and people like the content. It would be a huge help, and I would be grateful. Be sure to head over to sobermotivation.com and pick up the Sober Motivation ebook. This book will teach you about sobriety, motivation, maintaining sobriety, and motivation. Also, what would be some of the key things that you can do afterwards when becoming sober so that you can maintain the positive attitude to stay motivated and sober. Until next time, stay sober and stay motivated.